Hello, remember me? From the episode my dad made last season about garbage? Yeah, that was me, giving you a big old guilt trip for littering. I really hope it worked and that you haven't littered since the last time I talked to you, or you're in big trouble. If you're still littering, you're probably responsible for the bug problem in your town, or even worse, a mouse problem. Get this, my dad is so stupid he thinks fish eat mice. He believes everything he reads on the internet. You guys have probably figured that out by now from all the talk about lizard people and donkey ladies and orbs, though. I don't blame him. It's like voodoo magic to you old people that didn't have internet when you were kids. When my dad told me about fish eat mice, I said, oh yeah, just like there's an entrance to the hollow earth in Antarctica. Right, Dad? He kept trying to tell me that fish really do eat mice, but before he finished, I rolled my eyes at him in obvious disbelief and said, then why aren't they dumping truckloads of all the dead mice that die in mouse traps every day into the rivers to feed them? The fish must be starving if they're trying to eat the flies you make that are obviously fake and not alive. He didn't have an answer to that one. But I guess if that happened, fishing as we know it would just be over, and my dad would be pretty upset about that. The fish would never be hungry enough to even think about eating any of the hundreds of leeches my dad tries to make and fool them. They would be unfoolable and lazy after being fattened up on all-you-can-eat greasy mouse meat. Anyways, I'll just let my dad think he's right about the fish eating mice thing. He's happier that way, and that means more toys for me. All these truckloads of dead mice are a bigger problem waiting to happen, though. Mark my words.
Joke's on you, kid. It is real. You gotta trust me sometimes. I'm your dad, after all.
Who is your daddy, and what does he do?
Hey, everybody. It's me, Mark, again. Martin. I'm back with another installment of Secret Society of Fly Tires just for you. I've given you 16 episodes now. I think we're starting to know what to expect from each other. Unless this is your first time listening, which would be awkward. Where have you been? If that's the case, it's nice to meet you. You can call me Matt, or Marty, or Mark, or anything, really.
I always say people can call me anything they want as long as they don't call me late for supper.
We haven't gotten acquainted yet, but we'll be friends soon. There's 15 plus more hours of content for you to check out that has been lovingly crafted by yours truly. I hope you enjoy what I do here, whatever that is. That was my daughter at the top of the show. She thinks she's so smart, and she is. She alluded to it, and today's show has a slightly disgusting topic: mice.
Oh, grody.
I had the pleasure of spending an hour with Patrick Kilby to talk about a fly pattern he created to fool fish into thinking they're about to enjoy a big ol' honkin' meal. It's called the Pipsqueak mouse, and it's a proven producer. You can't wait to hear about it, and I'm going to tell you about it. I'm actually going to let Patrick tell you about it. You're going to want to catch a fish using one too. But before all that, I get to ramble about slightly related topics to get us all primed up for the interview. Which direction am I going to take it this time? I have it planned out, so I already know, but you don't. I'm asking you to guess.
Please, Matthew, just tell us. We want to know so bad.
Here's a different question. Will this podcast be removed and censored by the Illuminati if I talk about the mouse and his theme park that dubbed itself the happiest place on Earth? Right off the bat, the slogan is a flat-out lie. I told you that Finland is the happiest place on Earth a couple episodes ago, and that is a scientific fact, not a marketing slogan. And I'll tell you right now that they won't remove this. They aren't going to censor me. I'm just a tiny little outdoors crafting podcast that has only reached the #1 spot on the charts in a few countries so far. They haven't noticed me yet, so I'm going to go for it. It feels like I'm base jumping. But it also feels right going into dangerous territory to tell you all the hidden truths about the most famous mouse of them all.
Please be careful, Mark. We need you.
I'm exactly like a wartime reporter on the front lines with the troops, only it's on the internet, and I'm just kind of talking to you from the safety of the front seat of my car. Anyways, I have lots to share on this one, and I guess I'll start at the beginning. It's a little known fact that the original live Mickey Mouse, a man with the real name Michael S. Mousley, was a drifter that harassed the Disney family relentlessly for all of Walt and Roy Disney's childhood. Even though Mickey was violent and aggressive with their parents, Walt and Roy thought he was the funniest thing and grew to love him dearly. Michael didn't love them back whatsoever. In fact, he hated them, but that didn't matter. One day, in the winter of 1948, Michael Mousley was involved in a pedestrian versus car accident outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and died on the scene. The boys were devastated. They thought of Michael as the cool and violent uncle they never had and decided to dedicate a cartoon character they were working on to him with the hope of keeping his mischievous spirit alive. Their parents were still in the hospital from the attack that Michael was fleeing from when he was struck by that car and killed, so they didn't exactly approve of their children's plan to memorialize him. Roy eventually sided with his parents, but that motivated Walt even more. He was going to take his little cartoon about a drifter that routinely assaulted his parents and grow it into a media empire. What am I doing? I was going to write a long-winded and dark Batman-style fake origin story, but why? There's plenty of Disney-related stories I don't have to make up to fill the 20 or so minutes I use to ramble on my episodes before I let you enjoy the interviews.
And by the way, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
One personal story is when I wore a Dead Kennedys Nazi Punks Fuck Off shirt to Disneyland as a young teen.
Fuck Off, overproduced by Martin Hannett, take 4.
I was promptly asked to turn my shirt inside out when I was going through the security line to get in the park, and I thought, of course you Disney Nazis would make me turn this shirt inside out. Man. But I was just a stupid and naive young punk that maybe wanted to catch a set from the Country Bear Jamboree and enjoy some snacks and rides. I later understood it was obviously the inflammatory symbol of the swastika and the curse word that called for my shirt to be turned inside out in a family-friendly theme park. But I was a punk, and I wanted to be a mad victim, okay? I did what I was told and sulked until I got a churro and cheered back up. I'm old enough to remember a time when real Nazis were almost guaranteed to show up at DIY punk shows. It was just part of the gig. Punks get together to be weird and have fun listening to shitty music, and local Nazis come to put an end to that because they were mad about different things than we were and didn't like us having fun and being happy. There would be a bunch of posturing to fight, or maybe even a punch or two thrown, and then the parties would go their separate ways until next time. It was so routine it almost seemed fake. Maybe it was. Being a young punk is like half just a fetish of being treated poorly, so it kind of makes sense for a couple punks to throw on a different pair of boots and shave their heads and jump in the pit to take a few lumps for the team. All parties involved win, really. The punks allegedly cosplaying as Nazi skinheads get their masochistic rocks off getting stomped for a bit. It keeps everybody motivated to fight against evil, and the punks are prepared for when the real Nazis come back from Argentina or Antarctica or wherever else they've been hiding. Did you know there's a town in southern Brazil that has a, quote, staggering amount of twins attributed to alleged post-World War II Nazi experiments?
I did not know that.
Huh? Come again?
My name is Julius, and I'm your twin brother.
The town of Candido Godoy was a rumored hiding spot of the sadistic Dr. Joseph Mengele, and it's been said that he may have carried out experiments on the locals there that included administering a revolutionary twin-inducing drug to women, infecting one twin with various diseases, amputations, and more. This has been refuted by Brazilian geneticists, but Mengele died in Brazil in 1979 and was never tried for any of his many atrocious crimes against humanity. Us sheeple are left to speculate. Nazis in South America is a deep rabbit hole if you dare to explore it.
Do they dare? Yes. They dare.
It's not the only place they could have escaped, though. The Finnish documentary Iron Sky tells the story of a group of Nazis who, after being defeated in 1945, fled to the moon, where they built a space fleet to return in 2018 and conquer Earth. We all remember that happening in real life as we approach the 5-year anniversary of the battle where we defeated them again and sent them back to the moon where they came from.
Where are we from? The dark side of the moon! And we come in peace!
Who are these guys anyway?
Nazis from the moon.
Don't make me pull out a source. Watch the documentary for yourself. It's been said a bunch of them fled to Antarctica after a little-known German expedition that found them christening a cold chunk of the continent as New Schwabenland. Maybe they found the entrance to the Hollow Earth that Admiral Byrd allegedly found during Operation High Jump. His secret diaries supposedly told of his team finding their way underground into a warm, lush environment with remnants of an ancient civilization. I'm going to guess it connects to Mount Shasta by a series of tubes, and it's all the same group of Lemurians.
Oh. You're probably right as usual, Matty boy. I love you. I love you.
I'm going to use that as a segue to connect back to Disney. You see, Operation Paperclip was a secret United States intelligence program that brought in over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians from the Nazis for government employment after the end of World War II. Many of those imports were members, and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party. And one of them happened to be Werner von Braun, who became buddies with Walt Disney. Werner has lots of fatherly nicknames: the father of space travel, the father of rocket science, and the father of the American lunar program. The former Nazi scientist was instrumental in a lot of big official American things. They may have met when Disney hired von Braun as a technical consultant for a television show he put together in 1955 called Man in the Moon, which he also played a part in. In the show, von Braun discusses plans for a manned trip around the moon.
Now here's a model I designed for a 4-stage orbital rocket ship.
Probably to rendezvous with his pals that still live up there plotting their next invasion of Earth.
Wow. Right again, Marty.
I like to think that they met at a very secret Grand Lodge meeting, seeing as Disney and von Braun are both said to have been 33rd degree Freemasons. You know, the real Illuminati. That's why I was worried about this show being censored. Even though I'm nobody to them, I'm still a nobody blowing the lid off their secret club. 33rd degree Mason Albert Pike said it himself. The blue degrees are but the outcourt or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it is intended that he shall imagine he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of masonry. See, they want us to all think it's a regular boys' club that focuses on education, charity, friendship, a united belief in a higher power or supreme being, and community service, because that's what it is on the surface. But we all know what really happens after initiation into the 33rd degree. Once you know, the signs are literally everywhere. They control the
redacted
and Jay-Z, but they call him the light bearer and
redacted.
I mean, Walt even has the Club 33 at Disneyland. And did you know that every president of the United States
redacted?
Fucking crazy, right?
Wow. That says a lot, in my humble opinion.
Okay, enough about Nazis. I really only dove into the topic to serve as a cautionary tale of sorts for my 2-year-old half-Jewish nephew, Leon. He's walking now, and I just want to make sure he doesn't walk himself into any of these areas I spoke of earlier without parental supervision, alright? Once they start walking, kids are very elusive and quick. Divert your attention from them for a few moments, and they just might end up somewhere in South America in the wrong part of town.
Bist du verloren, Junge?
One more quick fact about Disneyland before I stop my paranoid, inane rambling and actually talk about mouse patterns. This one is for the foodies. We all know about In-N-Out Burger's quote-unquote secret menu items that have become not so secret. I probably eat something animal style once a week since I'm lucky enough to have one near me.
A 60 by 60 In-N-Out Burger.
Lots of places are known to have secret menu items now, like Jamba Juice with their white gummy bear smoothie, and the long list of wacky secret Starbucks drinks. Well, of course Disneyland isn't going to miss the pop culture bandwagon, and they developed a secret menu that can be applied at every restaurant at Disneyland in California or Florida. Just ask for your order to be served puke style, and you'll see what I mean. So, people tie flies to look like mice, and they catch fish with them. They do it in lots of places, for lots of different species of fish too. People from New Zealand to Alaska fish them successfully and net largemouth bass, rainbow trout, brown trout, brook trout, steelhead, and probably more. It's not just the huge monster fish chasing down mouse patterns either. Smaller fish will go for them too. You'll find out later in the interview, or maybe you already know, that my guest Patrick Kilby even developed a smaller version of the fly I invited him on to talk about, specifically because fish of all sizes have tried to eat his Pipsqueak mouse. He figured he'd make something that would be easier for him to cast on a lighter setup and be a better sized morsel for those smaller fish to inhale. So an even Pipsqueakier version of his awesome pattern is out there for fish to eat now too. It seems like you can probably use mouse patterns any time of the year too. But spring and fall look to be the most ideal seasons. Why don't you just do what you want and stop letting people tell you when to do things? I'm talking to myself, but that applies to you too. You can strip them and do your best to make them doggy paddle across the surface. You can swing them and let the current do the work. Whatever the situation calls for, do what the mouse would do. Become the mouse. Unless it's something super specific like the Clouser minnow or the graboid leech.
What are leeches anyway?
It's always hard for me to figure out exactly who the first person to tie up whatever pattern I'm highlighting was. I already made up one mouse story in this episode, so I'll just tell you that it sure seems like Alaska may have been where it all began. Why though? Do mice just get suicidal due to the cold or weird seasonal daylight hours? Don't they know that if a fish doesn't gobble them up when they dive in for a swim, they'll probably freeze to death? Or was fishing so plentiful up there that anglers started fucking around to see what the weirdest thing a fish would eat was? It's none of those things. A quick stomach pump of an Alaskan trout will show you they just love the flavor. You probably won't find a video of how to tie the Pipsqueak mouse online. I didn't, and I feel like I Google pretty good when I want to. You will find a ton of other mouse tying videos though, and they vary greatly. Some made pretty much solely out of deer hair, and I even found one that looked exactly like Michael S. Mousley. Do conventional anglers use dead or even live mice as bait? Like a live minnow for stripers or something? That would be kind of wild. I didn't ask Patrick Kilby that question, but I had a long list of things to ask him when he agreed to Zoom with me. I hope you enjoy our chat about mice and rods getting blown up by bomb squads and other stuff, because I sure did. Patrick, thanks for coming on the show, dude.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, but besides for your obvious fly tying skills, you come highly recommended by a very reputable source, Britta Fordyce, who I just recently had on to talk about shrimp patterns. And we were chatting after the interview was over, and I mentioned that I wanted to do an episode about mouse patterns, and it didn't take her more than a second or two to say, "Oh, you got to talk to Patrick about the Pipsqueak." And here we are.
Nice.
Yeah. Now I don't fish mouse patterns on my home water here in Northern California. They might work because we definitely have mice, but you know, the access points that I know don't allow fishing after dark, which I think is a big factor in this weird little corner of fly fishing and fly tying. And I could probably come up with some other excuses too, but anyhow,
I think that, what we see like portrayed on social media and such is you do see more kind of the nighttime, flash light up the image of people with brown trout and they're night fishing with mice. But I do think that I don't know. I think you can do it a lot more than you realize.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Obviously in Alaska, people do it more of a seasonal piece. Like they're able to do it kind of that early season before the egg hatch really starts to get going.
Okay.
And you can just do it in low light. Like you could do it early morning or in the evening. It doesn't have to be dark from my experience. I'm sure we'll get there, but I have two versions of this fly, the original, and then I did a baby version. And I did that more so that I could fish it more around my waters. The original version was more designed for Alaska, and the smaller version I can throw with a 5-weight very easily.
Okay, cool.
And it just opens up lots of opportunities. I fished at midday in bright sun and riffle water and had a blast. So.
Nice. Yeah, cool, man. Well, I'm stoked to learn more about it. Like, to be honest, I wasn't familiar with the Pipsqueak until I started researching it when I got off the phone with Britta. It's a super rad pattern, and by the looks of a quick Instagram search, it works. I'm stoked to learn about it and learn about you. And let's start with some easy stuff. So where are you from?
So I live here on Bainbridge Island near the headquarters of Farbank Enterprises. So
cool.
Sage, Reddington, Rio, and Flywater Travel. Yeah, I just live not too far from here.
Nice. Did you grow up out there?
I grew up in Southwest Washington and been in Washington most of my life. Little stints in Oregon, but most of the time here.
Cool. So you just mentioned your home waters. What do you consider your home waters there? I mean, is it mostly salt water there around Bainbridge Island, or? I
mean, there's that. Obviously, we're surrounded by water, so you have sea run cutthroat and some coho in the late summer, early fall. We have rivers that we can trout fish from here locally off what we call the Olympic Peninsula. And then you can go over to the east side and fish places like the Yakima or the Teanaway, different rivers over there. I know the rivers down by Vancouver and Portland fairly well. I've spent a lot of time on the Deschutes River in Central Oregon. So, what I call home waters today would just be whatever's closest to me. But, where I really love to spend time would be maybe like places like the Deschutes or something like that.
Way cool. Way cool. How did you get started tying your own flies?
I started trying to fly fish in my yard with just learning how to cast when I was probably, I don't know, 12-ish, 13-ish. And it was because I had seen, when you're in grade school and you do you cut out pictures to make a collage or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so the teacher brings in all these magazines. Well, one of the magazines was like a Field and Stream or something like that. And there was this one beautiful image of a fish rising, and it was that dimple in the water. And I was just obsessed with that picture. I couldn't get enough of that picture. And so I'd always been intrigued by it. So when I got a little, I think it was an $18 fly rod, that was given to me to start, and I just beat the crud out of it in the street and the yard trying to cast. But I was super interested, and I had cousins that were into fly fishing.
Cool.
And they lived in northern Idaho. So I was able to go visit them while their dad went to work. They were teaching me how to tie flies. So I was taught how to tie a woolly bugger, like a lot of people start with.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught how to tie, I think a renegade was the other one that I learned. And when their dad got home that night, he took us out in their canoe to a local lake, and we caught perch on flies that we had tied that day.
Oh, sweet.
And I was kind of like, well, I know what I like to do now. This is my new thing.
Right on.
So yeah, got a fly tying kit shortly after that, and just couldn't get enough of it. I loved making a mess of things and tying with it and creating.
Very cool. Man, it's so cool it came together like that quickly too. I mean, it'd probably give anyone the bug,
Yeah.
When did it become something that you considered doing professionally, like tying and stuff?
Well, tying was never part of that equation. I would say just doing something I loved was what I was interested in. So like I had been in law enforcement for many years and wanted to work full time in it, but could never seem to get hired full time. I was a volunteer for 13 years, I think. And when I kind of finally got to that realization that maybe this isn't my career, I thought I better do something that I still love. So I went to work wrapping rods and coating rods and building fly rods for Kerry Berkheimer. Then through that job, I got introduced to a fly shop in Ashland, Oregon. So I ended up moving down there and managing a fly shop. Kind of fell in love with the flies in the fly shop. I was able to sell a lot of flies, and it was just because I was so interested in them and loved talking about them and showing customers the flies and how I had had success with it, or one of their fellow customers had had success with it. And I just was able to sell a lot of them, and it was so fun. And I had fun tricks I could do with them where I kept some aside in a locked drawer, and when customers would come to me that were ones that I would wanted to invest more time in, and I would wait till other customers left, and then I pulled these ones aside and said, hey, you got to look at these new flies I just got in. And I tell the story that it's kind of like like a drug deal in a way, right? Where it's like you be secretive about it, you stoke them out about it, you give them some for free, and then all of a sudden they're hooked on it and they're coming back to you to buy more. But it's fun, and it's a healthy vice, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
So anyway, once I left the fly shop, I went to work for a fly tying company. I worked for them for 10 years. I got to know, you've interviewed Hogan. I got to know Hogan through that job. I knew Jason Hartwick through that job. You've interviewed him.
Yeah.
Just got introduced to the factories and the flies and people, and just stayed in love with it. I couldn't get enough of it. When I was working here at Farbank, they wanted to put Rio. They wanted to have flies being sold by Rio a few years back, I think 5 years back. And so I was tapped to step in and kind of just use my background to help get this going. And so it just became my job. I actually said no to it at first because it was my hobby, right? It was my last kind of like what I thought was my last real hobby in the fly fishing space, where I loved fly fishing, talking about it, but it was my job. And so I said no to the tying job and then came back to it. And I'm glad I did, because
Saying no because you thought it was going to ruin it for you or something?
Yeah. I didn't want my hobby to become my work.
Yeah, totally.
But as it turns out, it did take that hobby away because I don't tie at home anymore. I don't tie like my own stuff like that. But now I'm like, I get paid to do it, right? Like it's my job now. And that's awesome. So now I'm going to go find a new hobby and enjoy my job.
Nice, man. Have you found one yet? Anything you're poking around?
I think I've watched every gold panning video during YouTube on YouTube during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty intrigued by that.
I live up, or I grew up near Placerville.
Oh yeah.
Up here, and I live closer to Sacramento now. But yeah, it's a big gold rush town, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, Grass Valley, all that zone down there is very popular for it. I'm not into I get frustrated when I see dredge mining because it just sucks all the gravel up and it disturbs so much stuff. But
yeah,
if what I'm going to do is up out of the river itself, it could be very, very fun and non-destructive, at least the way I'm seeing it. So
yeah.
I haven't done it yet.
You're typically going to beautiful places too, right?
Yeah, you're in the same places.
Yeah,
your same places. We joke that trout don't live in ugly places, and I would say the same for that.
Yeah, that's a cool side quest too to fishing. That you can, if maybe fishing's not good, not having a good day, frustrated, and
throw a gold pan in your backpack, and stop for lunch, or you see a good piece of bedrock that's catching your eye. Why not?
Maybe get lucky too. I definitely had neighbors up in Placerville that had gold nuggets, on their, kitchen windowsill and stuff like that for sure. And, you mentioned the dredgers. I definitely ran into a weird little dredge operation one time hiking down the upper Yuba River, which I guess isn't that far from Grass Valley and stuff like that in Auburn. It's further north. But yeah, it was like a, weed whacker engine or something like that hooked up to something crazy. It was a crazy operation. And I think it was a good thing that I had my young daughter strapped on and my wife with me, and we just kind of, went our own way. But
yeah. No, there's definitely some regulations that need to be monitored. And I know there's people fighting to try to stop suction dredging like that because it is destructive. It moves all that spawning gravel around, puts a ton of silt into the system. They try to restrict it by the time of year that it's allowed and how big of a dredge you can use and such, but it's just messy, and I would prefer it not happening.
By coincidence, you mentioned Hogan. I had a little string of Rio folks on my show, Rio related folks, Hogan Brown and Britta, and now you. Can you explain your current role, what you do at Rio there?
Yeah, so I would be considered the flies manager for Rio. I work for the product development team. So, the first probably 4.5 years of this, Britta and I spent most of our time developing new patterns for Rio. And then over the last year or so, we've started to introduce signature tires to the portfolio. So, yeah, I mean, I work with our factories, maintain those relationships. I help do the forecasting, and, we both help with quality control and sourcing certain things. I mean, we're fortunate the factories we work with can do a lot of the sourcing, which is awesome.
It sounds fun, man. And it seems like you guys are collecting a good group of folks. Is Hogan one of those signature tires you're talking about?
Yeah.
Who else have you guys recruited there?
So, Ken Morrish is a pretty big name that a lot of people know, and Ken works for us. He works as with Flywater Travel, but Farbank owns Flywater Travel also, so he's kind of part of the team here, and so we were able to get his flies. We have Josh Boyles and Gunnar Brammer. We have
Johnny King,
Jeffrey Fesco, Kat LaFlamme. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. We've got some new people that we haven't launched yet that are coming. Yeah, I mean, Thank you. I mean, I think we are doing a good job with it.
Yeah.
Our intention is not to be having hundreds and hundreds out there, but we think that we can do more with less if we get the right people.
Yeah. Far bank. I mean, I did a little snooping around, reading about you before we got the interview set up, and I read about you handling the job of warranty supervisor there. Is that something that you still do?
No, I did that for my first 5 years here. That's when I moved from my previous job. I moved up here to take that role.
Okay.
So I was the repair supervisor for Reddington and Sage. Yeah, I mean, it was a good job. I got to work with a great team. And, at the time, like Sage and Reddington both, I mean, well, Sage in particular did not have any kind of direct sales yet up until the point that they had that. That was their only contact with the end user of their product, right? So if a Sage rod was built here, sold to a fly shop sells it to the end user. If that ever broke, then they would reach back out to us. So then that was our direct contact with an end user. And so that managing that relationship was very delicate, right? Because if you're already starting off in a tough spot because somebody's frustrated that the rod broke. So you're kind of in the hole, you're in the negative. And so our job was to try to get them back to at least neutral, hopefully to, a positive resolution. And I think we did a good job with that.
That sounds like it could be fun too. I mean, so if listeners sent in their busted Sage or Reddington had a chance, it could have rolled right across your desk and you probably evaluated their rod and their story about it.
Well, I was the supervisor, so I didn't have to do the hands-on as much. I was more of the planning and, hiring and all that kind of stuff. So, but I definitely talked to my share of consumers. I usually got the ones that were elevated. But we talked to, tons of people that were extremely happy, and there's always some that are not, but that's any customer service role in any job.
I've done plenty myself. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Is there a story that all your friends have heard that I haven't, that you want to tell me about maybe like a good warranty story or something like that?
Boy, I mean, I always threatened that I would want to write a book one day on all that stuff, because there was just so many awesome stories that you'd hear. And
that is a great idea.
There was one, I don't know, there was always this joke that, if you just wrote broke while fishing or broke while fighting a fish on your repair form, we'd waive the fee. That's not true, but a lot of people wrote that on their stuff. And I think the funny part to me, there was a time where there was a rod, somebody took their rod tube to a fly shop. I believe it was in BC. And the shop was closed because the Olympics were in town. There was a parade that's going to be coming through that stretch of town. But they wanted this rod dropped off. So they took it to the shop, put it at the front porch, and left it, thinking when the shop opened up that day, they would get it. Well, meanwhile, police were doing the sweep of the streets prior to this Olympic parade coming through, and they see this suspicious device. And so they treat it like a bomb, right? And they bring in a bomb squad and they blow this thing up. They blow up the tube.
It's like a canvas pipe bomb tube.
Right. It was an aluminum Sage tube though. They blow it up. They treat it like a pipe bomb. Anyway, when this thing finally arrived to our building, it was in a police evidence bag. It was blown to shreds. And there was a repair form taped to it that said broke while fishing.
Oh, hell yeah. Do you think all the pieces are really in there? Was it just a pile of pieces or what?
It was pretty destroyed.
Yeah. That's funny, man. That's a good one. Well, I brought you on to talk about your mouse pattern, the Pipsqueak.
Mm-hmm.
When and where did you first catch a fish on a mouse pattern? Let's start there.
First time I caught a fish on a mouse, I don't even know if I could remember that. But I think the first time I was taught kind of what I was deemed the kind of more of a correct retrieve of it was on a float down the Rio Grande with some people from Duranglers.
Okay.
John Flick was rowing the boat, and he was teaching me how to make the cast, and not so much the cast, but where to target it on the bank, and how to employ the wiggle in my rod tip to make the fly kind of swim continuously versus like pop start, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm already learning, because I didn't realize that it was that detailed in presentation too. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about like a mouse swimming, if it's gonna swim, it's not gonna like chug like a popper, like a bass popper.
Sure.
It's just gonna cruise along and swim. Think of a dog swimming. We can all kind of picture that.
It's
now shrink it
dog
down.
paddling. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that is really how a mouse is going to swim too. They might stop and take a breather. They might turn around, whatever, but they're not going to like heavily go zigzagging. They're not going to chug. They're going to just kind of cruise at some speed across the surface. So John was teaching me how to kind of make the mouse do that. And we were only doing it for short, kind of just as we cast behind rocks and such. And the very first fish that I had eat it, I missed it, of course. But that it left an impression. Yeah. I'm like, so okay, pumped. This is rad.
Yeah. That's way cool, man. You mentioned throwing at a rock, right? Like, and have you actually seen like a mouse drop in the water where you're fishing mouse patterns and like watch them in like the wild environment do what you're trying to do? I mean, we can all watch videos we find and stuff like that. Right. I've ever really seen it happen at a spot,
I have not. The closest I've seen a mouse swimming was there was a house we lived in for a while where we got some mice into our garage, and the snap traps weren't getting it done. So I YouTubed it and found this bucket trap where you could put like a 5-gallon bucket and a little spinning can or bottle or jar on the top, put some peanut butter on it, a ramp up, right? So then they come up, spin off the bottle, and drop into the bucket. So I deployed that into the garage, and I caught 3 or 4. I mean, the first night, it was awesome. But I was able to see them in this like up close, how they looked wet, what their legs did. I mean, I was able to kind of get a front row seat as to what a swimming mouse looked like.
Cool.
And it really,
they like varying sizes too. You got to see like a couple different, ideas, and
they're all pretty much the same size. I mean, they're not.
But this is where the gears were turning for the Pipsqueak. This is totally, the creation. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good timing because I was kind of in that process of working on it. And that was just this lucky accident of getting a front row seat and seeing these things wet. And it kind of opened my eyes to, I would say, 2 to 3 kind of primary things that I put into the Pipsqueak. One was, you mentioned it, like that doggy paddle aspect. Their front legs get pretty hidden in their fur when they're swimming.
Tuck in.
Yeah. So I had front legs on it, and then I removed those because of that. The back legs were very visible, and that kind of fleshy pinkish color. It could have been out there already. I hadn't really seen somebody do that on a commercial mouse fly up until that point. Like I said, it might have already been out there, but I hadn't seen it. I also I tied the legs so there's like 2 strands of the rubber leg for a feet. So it gave a little wider spot at the foot, which added some weight to the rubber legs, and it allowed for like a fluttering and kicking action when it was in the water. So when it was sitting in current, or when you were retrieving it, those legs would kind of like kick as if it was a mouse kicking and swimming. So that came out of that bucket experiment. And how much I could kind of see the skin at their ears, that kind of pinky flesh kind of came through also in that when they were wetted out. And I'd say the last thing was, a lot of mice have like this in their chin, kind of white or creamy patch under their chin. And the way this rabbit is tied in is it leaves that white patch under their chin.
Okay.
So yeah, those were 3 design elements that came out of that. Just getting to observe the real thing, you know.
Is that white patch, is it just a different color fur there, or is it colored in? Like, what are you doing for that little?
No, it's so just at the collar of this fly, which if you think of it as the animal, it's like the neck area. I've got crosscut rabbit.
Okay. Yeah.
That's wrapped a few times around that. And the hide of that rabbit is that creamy white color.
So the hide's showing there.
So you can see the hide really well underneath there. And then the rabbit just makes a veil of that wet fur over the foam. And it gives it that nice dark variegated look, but it doesn't add a lot of water weight when you're casting. It's just kind of a veil of fur over it.
Very cool, man. Can you run through the materials that you need for it real quick?
Boy, I would say, I mean, you're going to need like a shank of some sort. I was making my own out of spinner wire, but you can buy like a pre-made shank.
Were you just not getting the right length or girth on it or something like that? Like, why were you making your own?
I wanted to just save cost.
Oh yeah,
was the primary thing. You know, like those pre-made shanks add up on a commercial level. So if we could just bend the wire ourselves, it was a little bit of savings there.
Yeah, that's cool.
You're going to need some wire to make a loop off the back to attach your hook to. It's a just classic octopus hook. You're going to need some legs
for that wire. Just if I could stop you, sorry. Is it are you using just like the intruder wire, or is it like a more of a heavy duty wire? What do you?
No, it's like that sinew wire, intruder wire.
Yeah. Okay.
I have the foam. Well, it's the tail goes on, and that is a rabbit strip that's kind of trimmed a certain way to taper back and give it a little stability.
That's cool. I've seen a lot of differences as I watched mice videos and what the people use for tails, like paracord and all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and I tried a lot of them. I ordered leather shoelaces off of websites. I tried the paracord type stuff. I tried Procore braid. I tried all kinds of things, and I just wasn't getting the same effect out of those materials as I was with the rabbit strip. So
cool.
You got the foam kind of carapace or cover, that kind of takes the shape of the width and the hump of the back of the mouse. That would be something that somebody would have to just kind of figure out, right? Like I had to make a template for myself so that I got them the same. Yeah. And then there's like some, kind of hackly chenille stuff that I have some dubbing at the back, and then I put the legs in. I did that so that the legs had a lot of freedom to kick behind, but not really come forward as much. So you got that the dubbing, and then you got the legs tied in. Then you have this like crystal hackle chenille type stuff for the belly. Then the rabbit that I talked about, that cross-cut rabbit for the collar. And then I did kind of I'll call it a heart shape of that pinky flesh colored ears. And the way it's tied in, the way it's shaped, is it does a few things for me. It serves as a sighter for anyone fishing it. So a lot of mice are very dark, and in low light conditions, like we talked about, it can be hard to see. Like you can kind of see the wake maybe, but you may not pick it up as easily in like darker environments. So that kind of flesh pink, those ears, you can really see from a long way off. So for us, it serves as a sighter. in the industry we call bin appeal, right? So like, how do I attract you as a fisherman first? Like, what's going to get you to pick this thing up in a bin?
Yeah.
That's our bin appeal. So
I talked about shrimp eyes with Britta about bin appeal.
Yeah. So, having those ears kind of anatomically, at least in the close to the correct spot, that's a bin appeal piece to that. But if you flip the fly over and look at it from underneath, you can just kind of catch the two edges of the ears as if it was the mouse. And so from the fish's perspective, they see that white chin, white neck area, and the tips of those pink ears.
Seeing the right profile for them, huh?
Those feet kicking. I mean, all of it looks really similar from underneath to a real thing.
Very cool.
So yeah, that's kind of
this template that you mentioned. Now this is tied commercially now, right? Like it's
it's been out for like 4 or 5 years.
Is this template something that you passed along in that process, or is, like how does that part of that fly end up being consistent commercially?
Yes, I made a PDF template for the factory and sent that off to them
cool.
so that they could replicate it the way I wanted it replicated.
Awesome. It's like the little stuff I'm interested in like that. That's super cool. Well, like you mentioned trying different tails and stuff. What were some hurdles along the way creating that pattern?
Boy, some of the hurdles I would say was if I didn't tie it well or tie it right, if it landed upside down, which it could easily, I wanted it to be able to flip back over and ride correctly. So if it did happen to land upside down on a cast, I wanted to like flick my rod tip once or twice and have it roll over and fish correctly. And I worked many samples to get that to happen. So the way the foam was cut, you would almost think it's the opposite, right? Like if it's more boat shaped so that the hull is on the bottom, that it would naturally skim along the surface.
Yeah, right itself too. Yeah.
And because this is pulled over the top, you would think that's just going to land upside down and stay that way. But the materials that can hold water create the weight, and that's underneath the fly. And the skating lip naturally wants to help kick it over. But the way the foam is curved and shaped, when water catches that, it naturally wants to dump it back over onto the correct alignment. So that was something I worked at a lot on this fly.
It doesn't seem like the type of pattern that you could really get right with like just having in a little swim tank. Like you got to go out and cast it around and retrieve it and do all kinds of stuff, get on the water. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have a swim tank here, and we have, I have a sink that we throw things into a lot. So I used those, but we have a pond behind the building. So we go cast in the pond and we can kind of see it swim or not. And I think how far the hook sat back from the body of the fly was the other piece I kind of worked a lot at to try to, whenever you see a hook looped onto a fly, a lot of people think, oh, cool, I'll be able to loop that off if my hook gets damaged and put a new hook on. Well, that's got some times where that works. But to me, this was not one of those times. I needed the hook to sit in a particular spot so that the tail wouldn't get caught in it, that the legs wouldn't get caught in it, but it wasn't so far back that I'm like, throat hooking a trout with it. So where it's positioned and the size of the hook were all critical in this. So those are probably two of the ones that I kind of chugged away. I mean, the template of the foam was a big one. That took me a long time also to get that right and where to tie it in and such.
Yeah, it's too cool. I always think of these patterns that people have. Their big signature patterns as like songs that like a popular band plays every night. And like, do you still enjoy tying it?
Boy, I don't tie these ever.
Oh yeah.
I kind of move on. So I tie it as my job. I tie it to create the pattern that I'm looking for. And I'm ready to hand off all the directions to a factory for them to replicate it. And if they've got it and it's done, then
You did it.
I just, then that one's done and I can move on to the next thing. And, unless a quality issue arises down the road, then I don't really have to go back to it. I revisited this fly probably 3 years after I did this, because like I mentioned, I wanted a smaller version.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to just downsize a few pieces to get it started. That crosscut rabbit was the piece that was not going to work anymore. I wanted the same color. I wanted that same veiling effect, but now the fibers or that hair, the fur was too long for the baby version. So we had to put it in a dubbing loop instead. So you cut the fibers off of the hide and put them in the dubbing loop to the length you want.
Well, trick.
And spin it up. And now it looks the same, acts the same. The piece you lose a little bit in that is that white throat and collar now, because you don't have the hide attached to it, but it was okay.
You're just paying attention to exactly how much space you're putting into the materials you're throwing into that loop to have it end up in that spot. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, so you made a variation on it 3 years in, or something like you said. What kind of variations have you seen other people tying of it? Are people making anything cool out there you've seen?
Of this fly?
Yeah.
I haven't seen anyone tie this one. I don't think
it sounds like kind of hard. And I looked around and I couldn't find a tying video online. I usually find a tying video of any pattern I'm looking for, and I couldn't find one. There's lots of people showing fishing it and showing fish they caught on it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm pretty, I don't know how to say it, but I could go either way with it, right? Like I would be flattered if somebody wanted to try to tie it, but at the same time, I designed this for our company to sell, right? So if other people are choosing to tie it instead of buy it from us, like that's a lost opportunity. But
for sure,
it helps popularize it when people are tying them. I mean, that's what fly tying is. So yeah, I'm not worried about it either way. If somebody wants to tie it, they can tie it. For now, I'll take it as that's kind of tricky. I don't want to attempt it, but I don't know. I think we live in a world of a bazillion talented fly tyers, and 5 minutes on Instagram will tell you there's tons of people tying cool stuff and sharing it and making cool videos about it. And if I had that stuff when I was young, my fly tying growth would have gone way faster. Like the recipe book I had was basically a picture of a fly and the ingredients or the materials you put in it.
Figure it out.
There were no do this with your thread. I mean, none of it. You just had to go figure it out. And man, I was humbled so many times at random times of being embarrassed about a fly falling apart, or being frustrated with myself for a fly not working right or swimming right or sinking and all the things. So we live in a day and age of amazing materials, the quality, the accessibility of it.
Yeah.
The knowledge that's on YouTube and Instagram is crazy. The books out there. I mean, it's very rich if you want to get into it and learn quickly.
It comes up often on my show about how lucky we are that's this little era that we're in. I mean, I started really getting deep into tying 3 years ago. Okay. And so I've always had the resources there, and I've watched a bunch of your tying videos, and when you posted that they were available, you're kind of jokingly critical on yourself about using them to fall asleep or something like that. And, personally, I appreciate the pace. You're talking about having these as a resource to do to learn how to do something or whatever. It could be recreating a pattern or just learning how to work with a material, the attention to detail is there, and I enjoy them. And I'll link to them and a few of them into the show notes and stuff. Do you have any advice for people who want to make tying tutorial videos like that?
I would say the reason I was kind of critical of myself, I think that's a theme, I wrestle with anyway, but
sure.
I mean, if you knew how many times they asked me to do that and I said, no, I don't want to do it because I don't want to be the face of this. I don't want to be out there, I'm pretty much a behind the scenes person.
Okay.
But what finally kind of got me to do it was if I was thinking about like teaching my kids or my kids' friends or someone like yourself that's new into the sport, new into the hobby, that is my pace. Like I'd rather slow down and show you a step or make sure you really understand it. So I don't speak fast. I think about what I'm going to say. And, so it's like, if you watch other stuff out there, it goes pretty quick. And so I think that's what you have to do. And I'm like, I don't do that. I would say
there's lots of those kind of videos out there, and they have a purpose too, like the time lapse, like this they go through for in a minute.
If you can pause a video, by all means, those are great. Mm-hmm. but if you are really trying to learn, then having somebody that can show you slowly and or like reassure you on some steps, like when I tied the popsicle, tying with that marabou, right? Like it goes all over the place. It's messy feeling. And if you're new, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, like I'm trapping fibers everywhere and so on. And I think in that video, I said, like, don't worry about it, right? Just like pull the fibers back as you take these turns. And then when you're done, take a toothbrush or something through it and just comb the fibers back and release some of those, even if some of them break. Like,
yeah, was
right?
it that video? I want to say it was that video where I learned that you would take some of that marabou off of the thicker stem and throw it in a dubbing loop and spin it up. Was it on that popsicle video? Am I right?
No,
or was it something else? Okay. But that's another thing, like you mentioned, like those little details, right? Like the marabou stems are I always feel like they're super thick on parts that I want to use, and it feels like kind of impossible to wrap, or whatever. And I end up looking for videos that teach me little things like that. Like how do people deal with that?
Yeah, I think the tip in that video that I shared was I tied some Flashabou into the fly. And, when you have Flashabou in a bag, it's like, well, if you're new to tying, unless somebody shows you this, you're going to do what I've done 100 times, which is you take the Flashabou out of the bag and then never be able to get it back into that bag again.
Yeah.
So then people sell tubes that are meant to store things like that. And we learned a trick, or, I shared a trick in that video, whereas if you go up to the top and just take a little corner notch out of that bag with your scissors, you can stick the point of your scissors into there and just kind of catch 2 or 3 or 4 fibers, and then slide those fibers out of the bag and trim them off and leave all the rest of those fibers in the bag where they were.
Nice and straight and flat. And,
totally. Yeah. So little tiny things like that are helpful. They help you keep your stuff organized. It keeps the original package with it, so you don't forget which color that was when you need to write it down someday or whatever. So I think those little tricks and tips are handy.
Yeah, my box that I keep my flash stuff in definitely has like 6 or 7 of those before I learned the trick, and they're still hanging out, and I'm still cutting pieces off them.
Yeah, and sometimes they stay fine, but I've had too many of them get all damaged and crinkled up, and
they stick together, and
them they don't seem to like to lose that crease.
Yeah. So you mentioned we've talked a lot about fishing, retrieving the mouse and stuff like that. How should people rig a mouse like the Pipsqueak, for fishing?
Boy, if I'm going to fish it, I typically have it on a non-slip mono loop so that the mouse has some more wiggle.
Okay.
But I don't know how accurate, how necessary that is, because I think if you tied it on straight, like an improved clinch or something like that, that it's still going to fish well. Like it's not, like I said, it's not needing to zigzag back and forth, which that mono loop would allow it to do. But I don't think it hurts. Like it's not moving wildly back and forth. It's just got some life to it. And so I think I prefer the mono loop when I tie these on, but I don't think it's required.
Yeah. It seems like maybe that would help it right itself in a weird situation, maybe just because there's a little play there. I don't know. Who knows, right?
Could be.
Now, you've already mentioned a couple different geographic areas that you used mouse patterns. I mean, you talked about tying the original pattern for use in Alaska, and then you you made the variation for a smaller version for your closer to home waters, and you talked about Idaho. I definitely hear about people catching them on the Truckee River up here, using mice. But like, where do people go to catch trout on mice typically? I mean, is it just anywhere mice live? I mean, or is it just kind of specific spots?
No, I think that's the beauty of it, is like mice are kind of everywhere. And it's not just a big fish, in particular brown trout. It's not just for that. I mean, in Alaska, you see a lot of it happening for those leopard rainbows there. And similarly, when Russia was open to travel, it was similar fishery there with mice. I think I've seen it done a lot down in like Jurassic Lake area, tributaries of Jurassic Lake. And, like I said, the Great Lakes zones in the you see that nighttime fishing for brown trout. That's pretty popular.
But that's kind of a misconception, though. It's not just a night fishing thing.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I think, in a place like that, I haven't done it there, so it might not be a daytime thing. I think brown trout, specifically big brown trout, love to be nocturnal hunters. So I think that's why it lends itself to finding those big brown trout, because they're cruising around hunting at night. I don't, for whatever reason, I haven't been in a lot of brown trout fisheries. I've been in a lot of more rainbow and cutthroat fisheries. So, but I don't know. Like I said, once I started fishing the baby Pipsqueak, on like 4 and 5 weights for smaller rainbows, like it was awesome. Like I had so much fun.
Will eat it. Yeah.
I mean, at times it can be real fun. It's like anything. I threw it a lot for cutthroat this September on an Idaho trip, and I don't think I maybe got one slap at it, and it was like, okay, this is clearly not what they were looking for. So
that
doesn't always work, but it's super fun to fish. So
I mentioned to my parents the other night, I was telling them I was going to interview you about mouse patterns, and they had no clue that trout would eat something like that.
Right, a lot of people don't.
Yeah, trout eating mice is something that most people don't think fish would. They don't think fish do that. And
can
you think anything else in fishing that people who don't fish wouldn't believe like that?
I think of stuff like things that hurt us, like yellow jackets and bees, and like, not that bees go out looking to hurt us, but wasps and yellow jackets, things like that can bite and sting. We don't want to mess with. So why would a fish want to mess with that, right? And so that one comes to mind.
I feel like I would not tie something that looked like a bee, thinking that that fish wouldn't eat it. But I've definitely bought poppers that look like bees and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I would think, when I think of crawdads, I think of them being pretty big, and I've always thought of them more as like a bass lure, black bass fly. But there's certain settings where kind of small, freshly molted or soft shell type crawdads or crayfish, trout love those things in certain waterways. So I think there's plenty of things out there that trout eat that we wouldn't think of. But a mouse, a mouse, I sure get that, right? Like,
you think frog, you're like frog, sure, frogs are in the water and whatever. Mouse doesn't seem like it. And I think people would probably be surprised that you catch bass and stuff on lizard patterns too, or all kinds of crazy stuff.
Sure, salamanders. Yeah.
What are some of your other patterns that you've developed besides for this Pipsqueak mouse we've been yapping about?
Well, like you just mentioned frog. So like, I have 2 frog patterns here, but one in particular took me. It might have taken me a year of pretty actively working on it to get it right, to get it to do what I wanted it to do. And
those both seem like complicated patterns to figure out.
Yeah, at least from what I was trying to achieve with it, it definitely was complex. Like I wanted it to, like if you're fishing a topwater frog, like I don't know if you've ever gear fished with bass stuff, but like I've done a lot of that. And if you have a topwater frog and
I've bought a lot of them, and I've never caught a bass on them though. I've never been able to do it.
So these new soft-bodied hollow frogs, they have the double hook that like rides up, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you fish those, they come over lily pads and structure without getting hung up on anything really. They sit really nice in the water, and I wanted something that could do that in a fly world. You see so many frogs where the hook point is down, and then you rely on weed guards to protect the hook. But if you bring one of those over a lily pad, what does it do? It rolls over, and then when it falls off the lily pad, sometimes it's upside down now, or it's acting weird.
Yeah.
When bass are like in the area and something glides off the lily pad like that, that can be the moment that they hit. And if your fly is acting goofy right then, you're done. So I wanted it to just glide off softly and sit in the water. If you look at a frog at rest, it's sitting at like a, maybe it's not a 45, but it's at some angle with its eyes out of the water.
Little butt dip.
Right. So its nose, its eyes kind of sticking out of the water. Mm-hmm. Its front legs are pretty well sticking straight out or slightly down. Their legs are relaxed and hanging pretty well extended out beyond them. So that look, I wanted that to happen.
It seems like the same thing people are looking for in some crab patterns, like when they stop to have them splay out legs like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So similar to the mouse, I didn't want it, if it did land upside down, I wanted it to right itself. I did want it weedless so you could fish it in slop, where a lot of bass fishing can take place. I wanted, the legs and the colors to kind of be themed for northern leopards, southern leopards. I wanted the black one if you fish it in low light. And I wanted the belly of them to be kind of that buttery yellow coloration. So anyway, trying to get all of those design features to come together. It wouldn't work for a video or an audio podcast, but this bag, which you probably can't tell all of it. These are like all my samples from that original run that I tied so many variations of it to try to get it right. And anyway, it's something I'm very excited about. I love fishing it. And here's my tip for fishing it. Okay. So I will cast this into a spot that looks good, and it will hit, it'll splash. Maybe you'll land it on something soft like a lily pad or whatever, and it won't be as loud. But once it's in the water, let it sit, let it do what it's designed, where it's sitting like a relaxed frog, and give it like a 7 to 10 count. Like, I've done so much bass fishing in my life that I've watched bass in shallow water settings like that, and you'll see the wake. You'll see them come over. They're curious. They're going to come look at it. And you'll see lily pads disturb as they make their way over to it. And then everything stops as they get under it. And they're looking at it. And they're trying to decide, is that a real frog or not? So 7 to 10 seconds allows that to happen. And then just barely move it, just enough to kind of wiggle the legs or make it kind of like, move a few inches or something very subtle. And that is usually when they hammer it. If they haven't already hit it, like there's that reaction strike of it kind of first hitting the water that you'll get.
Yeah.
If you don't get that, then 7 to 10 seconds, do the slight move. I used to do 10. I'm now kind of at 7 or 8. So like somewhere in there, right? And then if they don't hit it on that move, then like we talked about with the mouse, what does a frog do? How does it swim? It doesn't pop. It doesn't chug like that.
Yeah.
It pushes off and glides kind of silently through just below the surface.
Yeah.
And then slides up and sits at rest and then pushes and glides and comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So I fish it the same way. I do these like slow kind of long pull, stop, slow, long pull, stop. And I can tell you, like, I fished a lot of bass stuff early on topwater gear and whatnot, conventional tackle. And I fished so much of it so fast because like that's what you'd see Bassmasters do and other things, right?
Yeah.
And you know, they catch them for sure. Not as often as maybe I thought we should or whatever, but I thought you had to fish them loud and obnoxious. And I'm starting to feel the opposite of that. Like if you're trying to mimic a frog, mimic the frog, right?
Yeah,
like, I would say if I had anything in fly tying that is my, you know, when they say like in a sport, go back to the basics, right? Like for me, fly tying is go look at the real thing. If you're trying to mimic a Baetis mayfly, go look at the Baetis mayfly.
Yeah.
Don't look at what so-and-so tied it like, because you're just going to maybe make something worse than it was, right? Go look at the real thing and tie off of that. So, and for fishing it, do the same thing.
Man, I love this. I love this tip. And I feel like if somebody tells you, if you're getting advice from somebody when it comes to fishing and they tell you a time to let it sit 7 to 10 seconds, listen to them and do it. Cause like, that was like my first, that was the first piece of advice I got the first time I went saltwater fishing from a local fly shop down in Costa Mesa. They're like, cast it out from here. Like I was told them where I was going. Like, oh, that's a good spot. When you get there, throw this color on, wait 7 seconds, and then start stripping it in and vary your strips and try different things and stuff like that. And like, sure enough, I caught a fish, maybe the second cast out there waiting like that. I mean, I'm sure there's other factors involved, obviously, but I feel like that's an important tip. And listen when people tell you that. I read another tip that that you shared that I want to share with listeners too, that you sometimes brush mud from the bank of the river that you're fishing on your fly before you fish it to kind of break it in. We all probably kind of get it wet first, you know, to get it wet. Rubbing it in the mud feels bad, but that seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, steelhead flies is what I primarily do that with. So, you know, I think a lesson I learned about, say, like a big bushy marabou fly is that there's a ton of trapped air in those fibers that you don't realize are there. And there was one day I was casting a freshly tied, you know, popsicle or something, and I had cast it out with a sink tip on and made my mend and started my swing, only to look out and see my fly floating on the surface, supporting supporting the weight of a sink tip and everything. Like, it was incredible. It looked like an indicator floating down the river. And I was shocked that it could hold that much air. And so from then on, I started pre-wetting my flies. And then I started like taking the mud and just rubbing it into it. And just, I think I do that to help just with like taking some scent out of it, right? Like whether it's my own scent, if it's been tied overseas, if it's been sitting in my fly box forever, like whatever scent may be on that, if I can just put some local scent now onto it, right? Like, and I'm not saying we're using scent as like a legal, you know, like you don't put scent on flies.
The scent of the area.
Right. So like the mud from that stream, just put it in there, rub it in, and that just kind of like helps remove the air, kind of rough it up a bit. And I will also learn pretty quickly, like if somehow this fly isn't tied well, it'll show itself pretty quickly. Like a hackle will come undone or something. And I'll be like, I'd rather learn now before I start fishing it. So then I rinse it all clean and give it a few squeezes to make sure there's just no air trapped in it. Rinse it again and then start fishing. So it's kind of a ritual. It sucks when it's cold because your hands get immediately like really cold when you do this move. But you know, if that first cast was your cast that you get your fish on, then it was all worth it, right? It shouldn't take you 3 or 4 casts before the fly kind of starts working correctly.
I love that kind of thing, little rituals that people do, man. I love it. Well, man, we're almost done here. I have one more question. It's my favorite question that I ask guests, and I always ask it. And I'm wondering if you have anything to share, since you spent so much time in law enforcement too. But have you ever had any like paranormal or supernatural like experiences?
I mean, I think I saw a UFO once, right? Like it was kind of this bright flash in the sky. But I would say more so it's like that I want to believe in a Bigfoot being out there, right? Like I love that thought of something mysterious like that living out in the woods.
Me too, man.
Always avoiding us, always like being elusive.
Yeah.
That's a cool thought when you're out there alone and you're like looking around like, am I being watched? Like, somehow that doesn't scare me. But if I think I'm being watched by a cougar, then I'm terrified,
God.
right?
Yeah, right.
But,
Totally.
But for whatever reason, like I love kind of that thought of Bigfoot being real. I don't know that it is, but I like the thought of it.
I like the wonder too, man. I mean, I read all kinds of stuff. I read it all. I love it. I think I saw something on Reddit. I think it was on Reddit today, but it led me to an article, Loch Ness Monster, right? Which is like kind of the one that people feel has been totally like proven to be just a tourist attraction hoax, right?
Right.
But that still persists, right? And it's not just the tourist board of of Scotland or wherever it is that's pushing the narrative. And I read an article today where a guy claimed that he had video footage of a sea creature or monster or something being sucked through a wormhole, and that Loch Ness monster Nessie is some type of interdimensional being traveling through wormholes, just like probably Bigfoot, right?
Gotcha.
Why we're not seeing him or whatever. But anyway, the weirder it gets, the more I love to read it. And, I want to believe it all. I do. But yeah, I ask everybody that. It's not fly tying related at all. But
well, you never know. Maybe someday there'll be Bigfoot hair flies that are just the best thing ever.
There's somebody out there sells Sasquatch pubes dubbing. I saw it online. And that UFO, it was just kind of a flash thing. It wasn't something significant.
No, I mean, it was just a flash in the sky that none of us in the car could wrap our heads around. But it was like,
who knows, right?
Who knows what that was?
Yeah. Well, man, thanks for wasting some time with me. I mean, and you know what? It was funny. You're the first person to call me on using a bunch of different names. Nobody ever says anything about it. And I thought that was hilarious that you did it. It's an inside joke kind of thing with my brothers and my friends, and kind of a little bit of a homage to prank caller Longmont Potion Castle using a bunch of different names too. But
yeah, it was like maybe it's just, sometimes I don't know. There's certain things I have great attention to detail.
This is the law enforcement.
And it could be the law enforcement. Like, who's up with this guy? What's going on? But either way, there's other things I miss, obviously, in life. But for some reason, I picked up on that pretty quickly.
That's funny. Well, I'm hoping 2023 brings you lots of luck. And if I'm ever up in your area, I'm going to bug you to come meet me for a drink or go fish or something, dude.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Thanks again, man.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks again to Patrick for staying late at the Rio office and letting me bug him about the Pipsqueak. I'll keep referring to myself with whatever names I feel like, okay? It's this cool, mysterious persona I'm curating for my fans. I loved that Patrick called me out on it, though. I threw links to Patrick's socials and a bunch of his tying videos in the show notes, along with other episode-related things. I touched on it with Patrick during our interview, but his pace in his videos is comforting in a Joe Parra kind of way. They're great to actually follow and maybe even learn to tie a new pattern or two. There were a few mouse-related things I forgot to ask Patrick about. First, the fact that mice aren't born with any bones and how science still hasn't found a way to explain it. And second, that mice can lose and regrow their tails like a lizard. In fact, early science textbooks noted mice being more closely related to lizards than rats.
Yes, that is true.
I'll circle back with Patrick via email and update you all in a future episode. One of these days, I'm going to convince someone to go night fishing with me and try to elicit some big violent grabs from hungry fish that want to eat mice. It's going to be so cool. At the end of one of my previous episodes, I included an ad for my fake online store, but I forgot to mention some other niche products I pretend to sell, like fly tying swim tank cleaning solution, a UV resin curing light helmet, bottles of my nose grease, and we just added some special tube melting lighters. And coming soon, we'll have canned artisanal guide-sourced fish goo from Togiak. Is it time this show actually had merchandise for sale? Real things? Stuff that isn't make-believe items that were the results of bad jokes I told on the show? Let me know. There's lots of ways to reach me online. Thanks for listening. For real. I'm still having fun with this and look forward to sharing another new episode with you soon. I'm going to insert my pre-recorded drop about organizations I like right here. Project Healing Waters brings a high-quality, full-spectrum fly fishing program to an ever-expanding number of veterans in need at over 200 locations nationwide. Project Healing Waters programs meet regularly throughout the year with volunteers teaching the basics and advanced techniques while building long-term relationships. It's much more than a one-time fly fishing trip. The program provides basic fly fishing, fly casting, fly tying, and rod building classes for participants whose skills range from beginners who have never fished before to those with prior fly fishing and tying experience. All fly fishing and tying equipment is provided to the participants at no cost. Fishing trips, both one-day and multi-day, are also provided free of charge to participants. Visit projecthealingwaters.org to learn more. Fishing the Good Fight is breaking down walls, smashing taboos, and building community. They believe that experiences in nature are an important part of caring for one's mental health. Less than 20% of men struggling with mental illness and or substance abuse are receiving professional support. The combination of a healthy therapeutic outlet, talk therapy, and a strong community will lead to mental well-being. Men face specific challenges when it comes to addressing mental health issues. According to Mental Health America, 6 million men living in the U.S. suffer from depression. In a National Center for Health Statistics studies, nearly 1 in 10 men reported experiencing some form of depression, but less than half sought treatment. 70% of all people who die by suicide are men. It's from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Men are often reluctant to seek help, particularly for depression, and are far less likely to access professional mental health services than women. Men make up less than 25% of people treated for depression and or substance abuse. For a lot of men, Fishing the Good Fight program, such as a retreat, is the first time they've opened up about struggles they faced, and 100% of men who attended a recent retreat indicated that they would seek professional help after the treatment. If you've ever wondered about your own mental health and wanted to improve your quality of life, Fishing the Good Fight can provide the tools, resources, and support to guide you along your wellness journey. FishingTheGoodFight.org has more information.
Hey, dumb idiot, guess what? This episode of the Secret Society of Fly Tires is brought to you by Conklin & Williams Attorneys at Law. Have you ever been bitten by a Bigfoot? Have you ever been verbally or physically harassed by a Loch Ness monster? Have you ever been cheated out of your earnings by a smooth ape? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then call Conklin & Williams Attorneys today. We specialize in resolving cryptid-related issues in a way that results in big bucks for you and ourselves. You don't pay unless we win your case, and we'll win. Believe me, we know what we're doing. We may not be board certified, but we are named Conklin & Williams. Those are our first names. I know it's weird, but we decided to call our law firm that because our first names sound like last names, and we just don't have last names. But we can talk about that when you come in for your free consultation. Call now and let's send the Bigfoot that bit your leg to jail for a very long time. This episode of the Secret Society of Fly Tires is brought to you by me. I paid for this episode using money I saved up from mowing lawns all summer, and I think it was worth every penny. Did you like today's episode? If you did, you have me and only me to thank because remember, I paid for it. It wouldn't be here without me. You're welcome.
Please note that this is not a real advertisement, and the company, brand, entity, or product mentioned in the preceding ad in no way endorses, agrees with, or knows about this podcast.